The blood wouldn't stop. Isolde pressed her palm harder against the wound below her ribs, feeling the hot pulse of it seeping between her fingers as she stumbled through the underbrush. Branches clawed at her face, her arms, her swollen belly, and she twisted to protect the life growing inside her, even as her own life leaked out onto the frozen forest floor. 7 months. She had carried this child for 7 months, through the whispers and the accusations, through the slow suffocation of her pack's contempt. She had endured it all because she believed, foolishly, desperately, that when the baby came, they would see. They would understand that she hadn't lied, that Cormac had been real, that he had loved her before the river took him. But tonight, Alpha Thorn had grown tired of waiting. "You think I'll let you whelp your bastard in my territory?" His voice still rang in her ears, thick with disgust. "You spread your legs for some wandering wolf who didn't even have the decency to claim you, and now you expect my pack to shelter your shame?" She had tried to explain. Again. For the 100th time she had tried to tell him that Cormac had planned to claim her, that they were going to petition for recognition, that the spring flood had taken him before he could. The blow had come without warning. Alpha Thorn's claws, extended and cruel, raking across her side as he snarled, "Get out. If I see you again, I'll cut that thing out of you myself and leave it for the crows." Her wolf had wanted to fight. Even now, bleeding and broken, some feral part of her wanted to turn back and tear out his throat for threatening her child. But her wolf was weak. Had been weak since Cormac died, since the grief had settled into her bones like frost. And the baby needed her alive more than her pride needed satisfaction. So she ran. The moon hung fat and silver above the trees, casting just enough light to see the roots that tried to trip her, the stones that bruised her bare feet. She had left with nothing. No supplies, no weapons, no plan beyond away, get away. The wound in her side burned like fire, and she could feel her steps growing sluggish, her vision starting to blur at the edges. "Please," she thought, her free hand cradling the swell of her belly. Inside, she felt her baby move, a fierce kick of protest, of defiance, of life refusing to surrender. "Please, let them live. Take me if you have to, but let my child live." She didn't know how long she ran. Time became meaningless, measured only in heartbeats and breaths, and the increasingly frequent moments when she had to catch herself against a tree to keep from falling. The forest changed around her without her noticing. The scraggly pines of thorn territory giving way to ancient oaks and silver birches, the air growing cleaner, sharper, carrying a scent she didn't recognize. It wasn't until she stumbled across the border marker, a massive stone carved with a crown and wolf's head, that she realized where her desperate flight had taken her. The Alpha King's territory. Isolde swayed on her feet, staring at the symbol that every wolf in the realm knew. Eric Valewood, the King of Wolves. The most powerful alpha in living memory, ruler of the Central Territories, and commander of armies that could crush her former pack like insects beneath a boot. She had never met him. Few common wolves had. He was a figure from stories, from whispered legends, a king who had united the fractured wolf territories through equal parts diplomacy and devastation, who could shift faster than the eye could follow, and whose wolf was said to be the size of a horse, and she was standing at the edge of his lands, bleeding and pregnant and completely alone. Her wolf stirred weakly, pressing against her consciousness with something that felt almost like hope. "Safety," her wolf seemed to whisper. "Safe here." But that was madness. Why would the Alpha King offer sanctuary to a disgraced pregnant nobody from a minor pack? He would send her back to Thorn, or worse, turn her away to die in the forest between territories where no pack would claim her body. Still, the alternative was certain death. Isolde took one step across the border, then another. The stone marker seemed to pulse with ancient power as she passed it, and somewhere in the distance she heard a wolf howl, a deep, resonant sound that vibrated through her chest and made her baby kick again. I'm sorry, she thought, to Cormac, to her child, to whatever gods might be listening. I'm sorry I couldn't give you more than this. Her legs gave out without warning. The ground rushed up to meet her, and she twisted at the last second, taking the impact on her shoulder instead of her stomach. Pain exploded through her side, her wound tearing wider, and she felt the hot rush of fresh blood soaking through her ruined dress. Above her, the stars wheeled and blurred. The cold of the frozen earth seeped into her bones, and she thought distantly that this wasn't the worst place to die. The trees here were beautiful, tall and strong, their bare branches reaching toward the sky like prayers. Her baby kicked once more, weaker now, and Isolde wrapped both arms around her belly and closed her eyes. Live, she thought fiercely, pouring every last shred of her will into the command. Whatever happens to me, you live and you grow strong, and you find someone who will love you the way I already do. Please, please, live. The darkness took her. But not before she heard the thunder of paws approaching through the forest, felt the vibration of massive bodies moving fast, caught the edge of a scent that made her wolf surge against her skin one final time. Pine and wood smoke, and something ancient, something powerful, something that called to her in a voice she had never heard, but somehow recognized in the marrow of her bones. Mate, her wolf whispered, the word impossible and undeniable and absolutely insane, given that she was dying and pregnant with another wolf's child. Then the darkness swallowed everything, and Isolde Stoneheart fell into the space between life and death, held there only by the desperate, defiant heartbeat of the child she had sworn to protect. She dreamed of warmth. After so many months of cold, the cold of her pack's rejection, the cold of empty arms where Cormac should have been, the cold of loneliness so profound it had become physical, the warmth was almost painful. It seeped into her frozen limbs, wrapped around her aching body, settled against the constant throb of her wound until the pain became something distant, manageable. In the dream, someone was holding her hand. The grip was strong but careful. Calloused fingers wrapped around hers with a gentleness that made her throat tight. She couldn't see their face. The dream was all sensation and no sight. But she could feel their presence like a sun she had been orbiting her whole life without knowing it. Stay, the presence seemed to say. Come back. Stay. So she did. Consciousness returned in fragments. The softness of sheets, silk, her mind noted with distant confusion, because she had never felt silk against her skin before. The crackle of a fire somewhere nearby, the sharp, clean scent of healing herbs and, beneath it, something else. Pine. Wood smoke. That same impossible, bone-deep recognition that had found her in the forest. Her wolf pressed forward urgently, and Isolde's eyes flew open. The room was beautiful, all warm wood and rich tapestries, lit by the golden glow of a massive fireplace. But she didn't see any of it. She couldn't see anything except the man sitting in the chair beside her bed, and the way his dark eyes had widened at the exact moment her own had opened. Heat exploded through her chest. It was like a wildfire catching dry timber, a conflagration that roared through her blood and left her gasping. Every nerve in her body came alive at once, straining toward him with a desperation that terrified her. Her wolf surged against her skin with more strength than it had shown in months, recognition flooding through every cell of her being. No, her mind screamed, this is impossible. I'm pregnant. I carry another wolf's child. This can't. But her body didn't care about logic. Her body knew him the way it knew how to breathe, and the bond snapping into place between them was the most undeniable thing she had ever felt. Across from her, the Alpha King, because this had to be him, There was no other explanation for the power that radiated from his massive frame, like heat from a forge, sucked in a sharp breath. She watched, transfixed, as gold bled into his dark eyes, watched his hands grip the arms of his chair until the wood cracked and splintered beneath his fingers. "Mate," he growled, and the word was half reverent and half savage, torn from somewhere deep in his chest. Isolde opened her mouth to deny it, to explain that this was wrong, that she was damaged goods, that she carried another wolf's child and no true mate bond would form under such circumstances. But the word that came out was not a denial. "Mate," she whispered back, and felt the world shift irrevocably beneath her. The silence stretched between them like a held breath. Isolde's heart hammered against her ribs, each beat sending waves of that impossible heat cascading through her body. Her wolf pressed against her skin, demanding she move closer to him, demanding she touch him, demanding she acknowledge what every fiber of her being already knew. But her mind, her stubborn, terrified, grief-scarred mind, refused to surrender. "This isn't possible," she heard herself say, and her voice came out hoarse, barely more than a whisper. "I'm carrying another wolf's child. The bond doesn't work like this." Eric Valewood didn't move. He sat frozen in that chair, his knuckles white where they gripped the splintered wood, his chest rising and falling with carefully controlled breaths. The gold in his eyes hadn't faded. If anything, it had intensified, swallowing the dark until she felt like she was staring into twin suns. "The bond," he said slowly, each word measured and precise, as if he was fighting to keep his voice level, "doesn't care about what should or shouldn't be possible." A shiver traced down her spine at the sound of his voice. It was deep and rough, resonant with a power that seemed to vibrate in her bones. Her wolf purred in response, pressing harder against her consciousness, and Isolde had to dig her nails into her palms to keep from reaching for him. "You're the Alpha King," she said, and the words felt absurd even as she spoke them. "You could have any female in the realm. Someone whole. Someone who isn't—" She gestured helplessly at her swollen belly, at the bandaged wound beneath her ribs, at every broken piece of herself that she had brought to his doorstep. Something flickered across his face. Not disgust, not pity, but something fiercer. Something that looked almost like anger, though not directed at her. "You think that matters to me?" His voice dropped lower, and she felt the rumble of it in her chest. "You think I care about what the realm expects?" "You should." The words came out sharper than she intended, edged with all the bitterness that had accumulated over months of being told she was worthless, unwanted, a burden. "You should care that your mate is a disgraced pregnant she-wolf who was thrown out of her pack like garbage. You should care that I have nothing to offer you except shame and scandal." Eric's eyes blazed. In one fluid motion, he released the arms of the chair and leaned forward, his massive frame somehow making the gesture feel protective rather than threatening. This close, she could see the sharp cut of his jaw, the way his dark hair fell across his forehead, the fine lines around his eyes that spoke of burdens carried and decisions made. "I should care," he repeated, his voice a low growl that made her breath catch. "About what? The fact that you survived something that would have broken most wolves? The fact that you ran through a freezing forest, bleeding and alone, and still made it to my border with enough strength left to cross it? The fact that my patrol found you unconscious but still curled around your belly, still protecting your child even when you had nothing left to give?" Isolde's throat tightened. She hadn't known anyone had seen that. Hadn't known that her last desperate act of protection had been witnessed. "They told me," Eric continued, his voice softening slightly, "that when they tried to separate your arms from your stomach to treat your wound, you fought them. You were barely conscious, half dead from blood loss, and you still fought to protect what was yours." Tears burned behind her eyes, and she blinked them back furiously. She had spent so many months being told she was weak, that her child was a mistake, that her grief over Cormac was self-indulgent and pathetic. She didn't know how to process someone seeing her differently. "That's not strength," she managed. "That's desperation." Desperation in the service of love is its own kind of strength. Eric held her gaze, and for a moment the gold in his eyes seemed to pulse with something that reached directly into her chest and squeezed. "The bond chose you for a reason, Isolde. I don't question fate's wisdom." Her name on his lips sent another wave of warmth flooding through her veins, her skin prickling with awareness as if every nerve ending was straining toward him. The mate bond hummed between them, an almost audible frequency that seemed to grow stronger with each passing second. "You don't know me," she whispered. "You don't know anything about me except that I showed up at your border half dead. Then tell me." He said it simply, without demand, without pressure. Just an invitation, offered as easily as breathing. "Tell me who you are. Tell me who hurt you. Tell me about the father of your child and why your pack threw you away like you were nothing." The sob caught her off guard. It tore out of her throat before she could stop it, followed by another, and then she was crying. Really crying, for the first time since she had fled into the forest. All the fear and grief and exhaustion she had been holding at bay came crashing down at once, and she couldn't breathe, couldn't think, couldn't do anything except shake apart under the weight of everything she had lost. She heard movement, felt the mattress dip beside her, and then warmth surrounded her. Not touching, not holding, but present. Close enough that she could feel the heat radiating from his body, close enough that his scent wrapped around her like a blanket. "You don't have to tell me now," Eric said quietly, his voice coming from somewhere just above her head. "You don't have to tell me ever if you don't want to. Just know that whatever happened, whatever brought you here, you're safe now. You and your child. No one will hurt you in my territory." Isolde didn't know how long she cried. Long enough that the fire burned lower, long enough that her throat went raw and her eyes swelled half shut. Through all of it, Eric stayed beside her, not touching, not pushing, just being there with a patience that seemed at odds with everything she had heard about the fearsome Alpha King. When the tears finally subsided, she found herself leaning toward him without meaning to, drawn by the pull of the bond and the simple, overwhelming comfort of his presence. She stopped herself before she actually touched him, some part of her still waiting for the rejection that had to be coming. It didn't come. Instead, Eric slowly, deliberately shifted his position. He moved to the edge of the bed, then down, until he was kneeling on the floor beside her. The Alpha King, the most powerful wolf in the realm, on his knees at her bedside. Isolde stared at him, uncomprehending. He extended one hand, palm up, and placed it on the mattress between them. The gesture was unmistakable. He was offering, not taking, letting her decide whether to bridge the distance between them. "I know you have no reason to trust me," he said, and his voice was rough with something that sounded almost like vulnerability. "I know you've been hurt by alphas who should have protected you, but I need you to understand something, Isolde. I need you to hear this and know that I mean every word." She couldn't look away from his hand. Large and calloused, with small scars across the knuckles that spoke of battles fought and won. It lay there on the silk sheets like an offering, like a promise, like something precious being extended to someone who had been told she was worthless. "The child you carry," Eric continued, "is not an obstacle, not a complication, not a problem to be solved." He paused, and when she finally raised her eyes to his face, she found him watching her with an intensity that stole her breath. "If you allow it, if you choose to accept this bond, to accept me, that child will be mine. In every way that matters. I will protect them, provide for them, love them as if they came from my own blood, because they come from you, and you are my mate." The words hit her like a physical force. She had expected conditions, explanations, perhaps an offer to raise the child separately, or to find a suitable family to take them in once they were born. She had not expected, could never have expected this. "You don't even know if it's a boy or a girl," she heard herself say, the protest weak even to her own ears. "You don't know anything about the father, about what bloodline. I don't care." Eric cut her off, not harshly, but with absolute certainty. "The child is yours. That is the only bloodline that matters to me." Her wolf surged again, and this time, Isolde didn't fight it. Her hand moved before her mind could catch up, crossing the distance between them to settle over his. His skin was warm beneath her palm, his fingers curling gently around hers with a tenderness that made something crack open inside her chest. A low sound rumbled from his throat. Not quite a growl, not quite a purr, but something in between that resonated through her body like a struck chord. The bond flared brighter, warmth flooding through her veins, and she felt her baby kick in response to the sensation. "They're strong," she whispered, not sure why she was telling him this but unable to stop the words. "The healers, my pack's healers, before they stopped treating me, they said the baby would be strong, stronger than they'd seen in years." Eric's eyes dropped to her belly, and she watched something shift in his expression. Not possessiveness exactly, but something deeper. Something that looked almost like wonder. "May I?" he asked, and his free hand hovered over her stomach, waiting. She should say no. She barely knew this man, this king, this stranger who claimed to be her mate. But her wolf was practically vibrating with approval, and the bond sang between them with a rightness she couldn't deny. She nodded. His palm settled over the curve of her belly with impossible gentleness. Calloused fingers splayed wide across the fabric of her borrowed nightgown. For a moment, nothing happened. And then the baby kicked, hard, directly against his hand. Eric sucked in a sharp breath. His eyes flashed gold again, and Isolde felt a tremor run through his massive frame. When he looked up at her, there was something raw and unguarded in his expression, something that looked almost like tears. "Hello," he said softly, not to her, but to her baby. "Hello, little one. I'm going to take care of you and your mother. I promise." The sob that escaped her this time was different. Not grief, not desperation, but something she hadn't felt in so long she barely recognized it. Hope. The days that followed blurred together in a haze of healing. Isolde slept more than she had in months, her body finally surrendering to exhaustion now that it had found safety. Eric visited every morning and evening, bringing her meals himself rather than sending servants. He told her stories about his territory, about the wolves he ruled, about the challenges of holding together a kingdom built from fractured pieces. He never asked about her past, never pushed for details about Cormac or her pack or the circumstances of her exile. He simply sat beside her bed and talked, filling the silence with his deep voice until she began to associate his presence with comfort rather than danger. Her wound healed faster than it should have. The palace healers whispered about it when they thought she couldn't hear, about the way her skin knit together almost overnight, about the strength of the child in her womb that seemed to accelerate her recovery. Isolde tried not to think about what it might mean. On the 5th day, she finally felt strong enough to leave her bed. Eric wasn't there when she woke that morning, and she took the opportunity to explore the room properly for the first time. It was larger than she had realized, with tall windows that overlooked a courtyard dusted with snow, and a wardrobe filled with dresses that looked like they had been made for someone exactly her size. She was standing at the window, watching wolves cross the courtyard below, when she heard voices in the corridor outside. "Can't seriously expect us to accept this." The speaker was male, his tone dripping with disdain. "A pregnant stray who claims to be the king's mate. She could be anyone. She could be a spy, or a madwoman, or—" "Watch your tongue," Councilman Herrick. Eric's voice, sharp as a blade. You're speaking about your future Luna. With all due respect, Your Majesty, we have only her word that the bond is genuine. There are ways to verify such claims. Ancient rites that would prove. You want to subject my injured, pregnant mate to interrogation rituals? The temperature in Eric's voice dropped to freezing. You want to put her through the kind of trial that has been known to harm unbonded wolves permanently? If she's truly your mate, the trial won't harm her. And if she's not, well, better to know now, before you've made any public declarations that can't be taken back. Isolde's hands curled into fists at her sides. She had heard this kind of talk before. The suspicion, the casual cruelty, the assumption that she was lying until proven otherwise. Her former pack had subjected her to weeks of it before finally casting her out. She didn't realize she had moved toward the door until she was already pushing it open. Eric and another man stood in the corridor, their bodies angled toward each other in a posture that spoke of confrontation barely held in check. The councilman, Harek, was older, with silver threading through his dark hair and the kind of aristocratic features that suggested generations of careful breeding. He looked at Isolde with an expression of poorly concealed contempt. "Ah," he said smoothly. "The lady herself. We were just discussing." The rest of his sentence cut off in a strangled gasp as Eric's hand closed around his throat. It happened so fast that Isolde barely saw him move. 1 second, they were standing apart. The next, Eric had Harek pinned against the corridor wall, his massive frame blocking any escape. "You will not speak to her," Eric snarled, and his voice had deepened into something barely human, the alpha command resonating through every word. "You will not look at her with that expression on your face. You will not refer to her as the lady or the stray or anything except her proper title." He leaned closer, and Isolde watched Harek's face go pale beneath the pressure of those golden eyes. "Her name is Isolde Stoneheart, and she is under my full protection as my mate and the future Luna of this territory. Anyone who disrespects her, anyone who questions her place at my side, will answer to my wolf. Do you understand?" Herrick made a choking sound that might have been agreement. Eric held him for another long moment, then released him with a contemptuous shove. Herrick stumbled, caught himself against the wall, and straightened his clothing with trembling hands. "I understand, Your Majesty," he managed, his voice hoarse. "I apologize for any offense." "You'll apologize to her." Harek's eyes flicked to Isolde, and she saw the humiliation burning beneath his carefully controlled expression. "I apologize, Lady Isolde. I spoke out of turn." She should accept the apology gracefully, should play the diplomat, smooth over the conflict, make peace with the wolves she would have to live among if she stayed here. That was what a Luna would do. But she had spent too many months being graceful while people called her names behind her back. She had swallowed too many insults from men who thought their power entitled them to treat her however they wished. "I'm not interested in your apology," she said quietly. "I'm interested in you understanding something, Councilman." She stepped forward, and somewhere deep in her chest, she felt her wolf rising, not weak and wounded anymore, but strengthened by the bond that pulsed between her and Eric. "I didn't ask to come here. I didn't scheme or manipulate my way into your king's bed. I was dying in the forest, and the bond found us anyway. So you can verify whatever you want. You can subject me to whatever tests you think will prove your suspicions. But when they show you exactly what I've already told you, that this bond is real, and that I am exactly who I say I am, you will remember this moment. And you will spend the rest of your service wondering how much of my goodwill you lost today." The silence that followed was absolute. Then Eric laughed. It was a surprised sound, rough and warm, and when Isolde glanced at him, she found him looking at her with an expression that made her breath catch. Pride, approval, and something else, something deeper that made her wolf curl with satisfaction. "You heard my mate," Eric said, his voice still edged with command but lighter now, almost amused. Get out of my sight, Herrick. And spread the word. Isolde Stoneheart is to be treated with the same respect you would show me. Anyone who fails to do so will learn exactly how creative I can be with punishments. Harrick fled. When they were alone, Eric turned to face her fully, and she realized for the first time how close he was standing. Close enough that she could feel the warmth radiating from his body. Close enough that his scent wrapped around her like an embrace. I shouldn't have intervened, he said quietly. You clearly didn't need my protection. No, she agreed, surprising herself with how steady her voice sounded. But I appreciated it anyway. His lips curved into something that wasn't quite a smile. Get used to it. I intend to protect you whether you need it or not. It's going to be a problem. Despite everything, despite the fear and the uncertainty, and the voice in her head that still insisted this couldn't be real, Isolde felt her mouth twitch toward a smile of her own. I can live with that problem, she said. And for the first time since Cormac died, she thought maybe she actually meant it. The warmth of Eric's presence lingered even after they parted ways in the corridor. Isolde returned to her chambers, her heart still beating too fast, her wolf still prowling beneath her skin, with a restless energy she hadn't felt in months. She pressed her palm against the solid oak door after closing it, grounding herself in the cool wood, trying to process everything that had just happened. She had challenged a member of the King's Council. She had stood her ground while carrying another wolf's child in her belly, while wearing borrowed clothes in a borrowed room, while her entire future hung on the whims of wolves she barely knew. And Eric had looked at her like she'd done something magnificent. Her baby kicked, a sharp flutter just below her ribs, and Isolde smiled despite herself. I know, she murmured, pressing her hand to the swell of her stomach. Your mother might have finally lost her mind, but it hadn't felt like madness. It had felt like waking up. The next 3 days passed in a strange blur of quiet moments and growing trust. Eric continued his morning and evening visits, but now they stretched longer, conversations wandering from practical matters to something more personal. He told her about his childhood in a minor pack, about the war that had killed his parents and left him fighting for survival at 14. She told him about Cormac, haltingly at first, then with more ease as she realized Eric genuinely wanted to know about the wolf who had loved her. He sounds like he was a good man, Eric said one evening, his voice soft in the firelight. He was. Isolde's throat tightened, but the grief that rose felt different now. Less like drowning, more like remembering. He would have been a good father. Eric was quiet for a moment. Then, carefully, as if afraid of breaking something fragile, I hope I can be worthy of the trust he can no longer fulfill. Before Isolde could respond, a sharp knock echoed through the chamber. Eric's expression shifted instantly, the warmth bleeding away into something harder, more alert. He rose from his chair as the door swung open to reveal a guard with a pale face and rigid posture. Your Majesty, a delegation has arrived at the gates. They claim the right of formal audience under the old laws. From which territory? The guard hesitated, and something cold slithered down Isolde's spine. They bear no territorial banner, sire. They carry the mark of the purest circle. Eric went completely still. When he spoke again, his voice had dropped to something that raised the hair on Isolde's arms. How many? 20 wolves. Their leader demanded to speak with you immediately. He says... The guard swallowed. He says he knows about the prophecy. Isolde's hand flew to her belly. What prophecy? But Eric was already moving toward the door, his shoulders tight with tension she hadn't seen in him before. He paused at the threshold, turning back to meet her eyes. Stay here. Lock the door behind me. Don't open it for anyone but me. Eric? Please, Isolde. Something desperate flickered in his expression. Please, I need to know you're safe while I deal with this. She nodded, though fear had begun to coil tight in her chest. Eric disappeared into the corridor, and she threw the bolt with trembling fingers, pressing her back against the wood as her wolf snarled warnings she didn't understand. The prophecy. The healers who had examined her before her exile, they had said her baby would be stronger than any they'd seen in years. She had thought nothing of it at the time, too consumed by grief and fear to pay attention to their hushed whispers. But someone else had been paying attention. The great hall fell silent when the delegation entered. Isolde wasn't supposed to be there. She had promised to stay in her chambers, had meant to honor that promise, but the not knowing had become unbearable after an hour of pacing, and her wolf had grown increasingly frantic, pressing against her skin with an urgency that felt like instinct. So she had slipped through the servants' corridors, following the pull of the bond until she found a shadowed alcove behind a pillar where she could watch without being seen. The wolves who filed into the hall moved with the rigid discipline of fanatics. They wore simple gray robes, but their eyes burned with a fervor that made Isolde's skin crawl. And at their head walked a wolf who made her stomach clench with immediate, visceral terror. He was old, ancient perhaps, with white hair that fell past his shoulders and a face like carved stone. But his eyes were young, bright with intelligence and something darker that Isolde recognized from her nightmares. He looked at the world like he was cataloging everything that didn't belong in it. Alpha King. His voice carried easily through the silent hall. I am Wulfric Silvermane, voice of the purest circle. I come to claim my right under the old laws. Eric sat on his throne like a blade waiting to be drawn. The old laws grant you audience, nothing more. State your business and leave my territory. Ah, but my business is within your territory. Wulfric smiled, and it was a terrible thing, patient and certain. The healers speak of a child whose power will upset the natural order, disrupt the balance of bloodlines that has sustained our kind for millennia. An abomination born of unsanctioned union, carried by a wolf of questionable virtue. Ice flooded Isolde's veins. She pressed deeper into the shadows, her hand clenching over her belly. Choose your next words carefully, Eric said, his voice dropping to a register that made several of Wulfric's followers shift uneasily. You speak of my mate. Your mate. Wulfric's smile widened. How convenient that you should find a mate bond with a pregnant exile precisely when prophecy speaks of a dangerous child. The Circle has seen this pattern before, Alpha King. Powerful wolves who let their desires cloud their judgment, who would bring ruin upon our kind for the sake of sentiment. You have no authority here. I have the authority of ancient law, the right of purification, granted to the Circle in the age of the first wolves. Wulfric raised his hand, and one of his followers produced a scroll. When a child threatens the natural order, the Circle may demand that child be surrendered for cleansing. 3 times in the past century, prophecy has spoken of such children. 3 times. The Circle has performed its sacred duty. He let the words hang in the air, and Isolde's heart stopped. 3 children. He had murdered 3 children. You will leave my kingdom, Eric said, rising from his throne with a fluid grace that belied his massive frame. Gold bled into his eyes, his wolf surging toward the surface. Now, before I forget the laws of hospitality entirely. The laws of hospitality protect us until we depart willingly. Wulfric was utterly unafraid, and that terrified Isolde more than anything. I will leave, Alpha King. But I will return in 7 days with an army of the faithful. Either you surrender the woman and her abomination to us for purification, or we will take them by force. The Circle has 300 wolves committed to this sacred purpose. Even you cannot stand against us all. Eric's snarl echoed off the stone walls. Try me. Sentiment. Wulfric shook his head, almost pitying. It will be your downfall. He turned to leave, then paused, his gaze sweeping the hall. For one horrible moment, his eyes seemed to find the shadows where Isolde hid. 7 days, Alpha King. Use them to make peace with your choice. The delegation filed out, and Isolde discovered she couldn't move. Her legs had locked in place, her heart pounding so violently she could feel it in her throat. 300 wolves. An army of fanatics who had already murdered 3 prophesied children, and they were coming for her baby. A hand closed gently around her arm, and she nearly screamed before she recognized Eric's scent, pine and something deeper, something that made her wolf press toward him instinctively. "You were supposed to stay in your chambers," he said quietly. "I couldn't." Her voice came out fractured. "I had to know. Eric. 3 children. He's killed 3 children." "I know." Eric's jaw was tight, his eyes still burning gold around the edges. "I know, Isolde. But I won't let him touch you or the baby. I swear it on my life." 300 wolves. I have more, and mine fight for something other than fanaticism. He cupped her face in his massive hands, forcing her to meet his eyes. "Look at me. Do you trust me?" It should have been impossible to answer that question after less than a week. She barely knew him, this king who had found her dying at his border. But her wolf trusted him absolutely, and for once, Isolde let herself follow that instinct instead of fighting it. "Yes," she whispered, "I trust you." Something eased in his expression. "Then trust me when I say I will burn this world to ash before I let anyone hurt you. You and the baby are mine to protect now, and I don't fail the wolves I love." Love. The word landed in her chest like a stone in still water, ripples spreading outward until she couldn't breathe. "Eric. You don't have to say anything." His thumbs traced gentle arcs across her cheekbones. "I know it's too soon. I know you're still grieving, still learning to trust me, but I needed you to know, so you understand exactly how far I will go." She should have pulled away, should have reminded him about Cormac, about the baby that wasn't his, about all the reasons this was too fast and too complicated and too much. Instead, she leaned forward and pressed her forehead against his chest, letting his warmth seep into her frozen limbs. His arms came around her immediately, cradling her against him with a tenderness that made her eyes sting. "We have 7 days," she said, her voice muffled against his shirt. "Yes." "What happens in 7 days?" Eric's arms tightened around her. "In 7 days, Wulfric Silvermane learns exactly what happens when someone threatens my mate." That night, Isolde couldn't sleep. She lay in her silken sheets, one hand resting on her belly where her baby moved in restless patterns, and stared at the canopy above her bed. Every time she closed her eyes, she saw Wulfric's face, that patient smile, those calculating eyes, the casual way he had spoken of murdering children like it was a sacred duty. Carve her child from her womb. He had implied it without saying the words, but she had heard them anyway. She would not surrender peacefully, and he would cut her open to take what he wanted. A sob built in her throat, and she swallowed it down. She had cried enough in the months since Cormac died. She had cried herself empty in the forest, bleeding and alone. She would not cry again, not when her baby needed her to be strong. But gods, she was so tired of being strong. A soft knock at her door made her sit up, her heart lurching. "Who's there?" "It's me." Eric's voice, low and rough like he hadn't slept either. Isolde crossed to the door and opened it to find him standing in the corridor, still dressed in his day clothes, his hair disheveled like he had been running his hands through it. "I couldn't stay away," he admitted, something raw in his expression. "I kept thinking about Wulfric and his fanatics, about what he said. I needed to see that you were safe. I'm safe." But her voice cracked on the word, betraying her. Eric's expression shifted. "Can I come in?" She stepped aside, and he entered her chambers, his presence filling the space in a way that should have felt intrusive, but instead felt like coming home. He didn't approach her bed. didn't presume anything. He simply settled into the chair by the fireplace. His chair, she had begun to think of it, and looked at her with eyes that held no judgment. "You're allowed to be afraid," he said quietly. "This is terrifying. I'm terrified. You don't seem terrified. I've had years of practice hiding it." A ghost of a smile crossed his face. "But make no mistake, the thought of losing you before I've even had the chance to know you properly is enough to drive my wolf to madness." Isolde crossed the room slowly, her bare feet silent on the thick carpet. She stopped in front of his chair, close enough to touch, and watched the firelight flicker across his features. "Tell me about the first time you were scared," she said. "Really scared the way I am now." Eric's smile faded into something more serious. "I was 14. My parents had just been killed in the territorial wars, and our pack was scattered. I spent 3 weeks hiding in the mountains, certain that every shadow held an enemy. I was convinced I would die alone, that no one would even remember my name. What happened? A wolf found me, an old female named Marta who had lost her own children in the war. She took me in, fed me, made me sleep, and she told me something I've never forgotten." His eyes met hers, dark and steady. "She said that fear is only useful if it makes you fight harder. If it makes you freeze, it will kill you. So I had to choose. Let the fear win, or turn it into fuel. And you turned it into fuel. I became the wolf no one could defeat. I united the territories because I was too afraid to ever be that vulnerable again." He reached out slowly, giving her time to pull away. When she didn't, his fingers brushed the back of her hand. "But I learned something else in those years. Fighting alone works for survival. It doesn't work for living." Isolde felt the warmth of his touch travel up her arm, settling somewhere behind her ribs. "I've been fighting alone for a long time." "I know." His thumb traced circles on her skin. "You don't have to anymore." She should have said something wise, something that acknowledged the complexity of their situation. Instead, exhaustion and terror and something softer combined into a single impulse, and she sank down onto the arm of his chair, close enough that their shoulders brushed. Eric inhaled sharply, his hand tightening around hers, but he didn't move away. "Isolde, I don't know what I'm doing," she admitted. "I'm pregnant with another wolf's child, and there's an army coming to kill us both. And I just found out that my baby might be part of some ancient prophecy that makes fanatics want to murder them. I should be planning, or strategizing, or doing something useful. But all I want right now is to not feel so alone." "You're not alone?" His voice had dropped to something rough and intimate. "I'm right here." "I know." She let her head tip sideways until it rested against his shoulder. "That's the strangest part. I barely know you, but when you're close, everything feels quieter, less impossible. That's the bond." His free hand came up to stroke her hair, the gesture achingly gentle. "It connects us in ways that go beyond logic. My wolf has known you were mine since the moment I found you in that forest, even before you woke and I looked into your eyes." "What does your wolf say about my baby?" Eric's hand stilled in her hair. Then, very quietly, "My wolf says that any child of yours is ours to protect. Blood doesn't make family, Isolde. Choice does. And I choose you. Both of you." The words cracked something open inside her, something she had been holding together with white knuckles since the day Cormac died. She felt tears spill down her cheeks, hot and unexpected, and she didn't have the strength to stop them. Eric turned toward her, pulling her gently into his arms until she was cradled against his chest, and he held her while she cried, not from grief this time, but from relief. From the overwhelming sensation of being chosen after so many months of being discarded. She didn't know how long they stayed like that. Long enough that the fire burned low and her tears dried. Long enough that her baby settled into stillness, perhaps soothed by the steady beat of Eric's heart. 7 days, she finally said, her voice hoarse. 7 days, Eric agreed. And then Wulfric learns what it means to threaten my family. Family. The word wrapped around her like armor, like a promise. And for the first time since she'd heard about the Purist Circle, Isolde felt something other than fear. She felt ready to fight. The 7 days passed in a blur of preparation and stolen moments. Eric's warriors drilled in the courtyard from dawn until dusk, their movements sharp and precise as they readied themselves for the coming battle. Isolde watched from her window. One hand pressed against the cool glass while the other rested on her belly, feeling her baby's restless kicks. The child seemed to sense the tension building in the palace, moving more than usual, pressing against her ribs as if trying to escape the confines of her body. She spent her days learning the layout of the palace, every corridor, every hidden passage, every room where children and those who could not fight would shelter when the attack came. Eric had tried to convince her to stay in the safe room with the others, but she had refused. "I won't hide while others fight for my child's life," she had told him, her voice steady despite the fear coiling in her stomach. "If Wulfric wants my baby, he'll have to go through me." Eric's jaw had tightened, but he hadn't argued. Instead, he had assigned 2 of his best warriors to guard her at all times, and he had spent every night in her chambers, holding her while they both pretended to sleep. On the morning of the 7th day, Isolde woke to silence. The birds had stopped singing. The usual sounds of palace life, servants moving through corridors, warriors calling to each other in the training yard, the distant clatter of the kitchens, had gone quiet. She sat up slowly, her heart already racing, and found Eric standing at the window with his back to her. "They're here," he said without turning. Earlier than expected. They must have marched through the night. Isolde pushed herself out of bed, her hands automatically moving to support her belly as she crossed the room to stand beside him. Through the window, she could see them, a dark mass of wolves and men flowing across the distant hills like a shadow consuming the land. Even from this distance, she could make out the white banner at the head of the army, the one bearing the Purist Circle's symbol. "How many?" she asked. "More than 300. Eric's voice was flat, controlled. "He gathered more fanatics than we anticipated." Isolde's throat tightened. "Can we hold them?" "We can." Eric finally turned to face her, and she saw the gold already bleeding into his dark eyes, his wolf pressing close to the surface. "But it will be bloody, and I need you to promise me something." "What?" "If the battle turns against us, if they breach the inner walls, you take the escape tunnel and you run. Don't look back. Don't wait for me. Just take our child and survive." The words hit her like a physical blow. "Eric, promise me." His hands came up to cradle her face, his touch gentle despite the tension radiating from every line of his body. "I cannot fight if I'm worried about you. I need to know that no matter what happens, you'll do whatever it takes to keep yourself and the baby safe." Isolde wanted to argue. She wanted to tell him that she would rather die fighting than flee while he fell. But she looked into his gold-rimmed eyes and saw the truth there. His fear, his love, his desperate need to protect her even at the cost of his own life. "I promise," she whispered. "But you have to promise me something too. Anything. Come back to me. Whatever happens out there, you find a way to come back." Eric leaned down and pressed his forehead to hers, breathing her in like she was the only thing keeping him anchored. Always. The battle began at midday. Isolde heard the clash of steel and the screams of wolves from her position in the inner keep, surrounded by guards and pressed against the wall of a corridor that connected to the escape tunnel. Every instinct screamed at her to move, to fight, to do something other than wait while others bled for her. Her baby kicked hard and she gasped, doubling over as a wave of heat rolled through her body. It wasn't pain. It was something else. Something that made her skin prickle and her wolf surge against her consciousness with sudden, overwhelming force. The power hummed through her veins like lightning trapped beneath her skin. One of her guards grabbed her arm. "My lady, are you—" The explosion shattered the far end of the corridor. Stone and dust filled the air, and Isolde's ears rang as she stumbled backward. Through the haze she saw figures emerging from the breach, wolves in human form, their eyes wild with fanatical fervor, their hands dripping with the blood of the warriors who had tried to stop them. And at their head, walking with calm, measured steps through the destruction he had wrought, was Wulfric Silvermane. "There she is," he said, his ancient voice cutting through the chaos like a blade. "The vessel." Isolde's guards moved to shield her, but Wulfric raised one hand. The wolves behind him surged forward, and the corridor erupted into violence. She watched her protectors fall, overwhelmed by sheer numbers, and she knew with terrible clarity that there was no one left between her and the monster who wanted to carve her child from her body. "Run," Eric had said. "Take the tunnel and run." But the tunnel was behind her, and the children of the palace were sheltering in the great hall, just down the adjacent corridor. If she ran, Wulfric's wolves would follow, and when they found the hall empty of their real target, they would slaughter everyone inside out of spite. Isolde made her choice. She stepped forward, away from the tunnel entrance, and raised her voice above the din. "Wulfric!" The cult leader's attention snapped to her, and a smile spread across his stone-carved features. "Ah, the vessel speaks. These wolves are mine to protect." She forced her voice steady even as her knees shook. "If you want my child, you'll have to go through me, not through children who have nothing to do with your delusions." Wulfric's smile widened. "Bold words for a pregnant exile, but I appreciate the offer. It saves me the trouble of hunting you through these halls." He gestured, and his wolves fell back, forming a loose circle around Isolde. Through the gaps between them, she could see the corridor to the great hall, could see the small face of a child peering through a crack in the doors before an adult hand pulled them back. Good. They were still safe. They could still escape while Wulfric's attention was fixed on her. "You speak of purification," Isolde said, stalling for time as she felt that strange power building in her chest. "You speak of protecting bloodlines, but you murder children, Wulfric. How is that pure?" "Sacrifices must be made." Wulfric began to circle her, his movements slow and predatory. "The prophecies have foretold abominations that will upset the natural order of our kind. Your child is one such abomination, a wolf of impossible power, born to a disgraced mother and now claimed by a king who has already weakened the old ways with his policies of inclusion." His lip curled. "You are a symptom of the disease. Your child is the infection. I am the cure." The power in Isolde's chest pulsed harder, and she felt her baby move in response, not with fear, but with something that felt almost like recognition. Like the child was reaching back, meeting her halfway. The old wolf in the stories, she remembered suddenly. The tales her mother had told her as a child about the magic that lived in the bond between mother and child. About how a mother's love could become a shield, a weapon, a force of nature that no enemy could withstand. She had thought they were just stories. Wulfric lunged. Isolde didn't think. She simply reached for that power, for the connection that hummed between her and the life growing inside her, and she pushed. Silver light erupted from her palms. The force of it threw Wulfric backward, sent his wolves scrambling with yelps of pain and surprise. A barrier shimmered into existence around Isolde. Not a wall, but a sphere of translucent silver energy that crackled and hummed with impossible power. For a moment, everyone froze. Then Wulfric laughed. A harsh, ugly sound that held no humor. "The abomination reveals itself. The child channels power through the mother. This is exactly what I warned the council about. Exactly what must be destroyed before it corrupts us all." "It's not corruption." Isolde's voice rang with new strength, bolstered by the power flowing through her. "It's protection. It's a mother's love, you pathetic old man. Something you clearly know nothing about. Wulfric's expression darkened. Love makes us weak. It makes us tolerate impurity, accept corruption, allow the bloodlines to degrade until we are nothing but shadows of what we once were. He raised his hand, and his wolves began circling the barrier, testing its edges. Your shield cannot hold forever, and when it falls, I will cut that abomination from your body and show the realm what happens to those who defy the natural order. Isolde felt the truth of his words. The barrier was already flickering at the edges, the power draining from her faster than she could replenish it. Her baby kicked frantically, trying to give her more, but they were both reaching their limits. She had bought time. The children in the Great Hall must have fled by now. But she was still going to die here, alone in this ruined corridor with a madman and his wolves. Unless she trusted the bond. Eric, she thought desperately, reaching for the thread of connection that had hummed between them since the moment their eyes first met. Eric, please. I need you. She didn't know if he could hear her. They hadn't completed the marking, hadn't fully sealed the mate bond. But she poured everything she had into that call, every ounce of love and fear and desperate hope. And she felt him answer. Not with words, but with sensation. A surge of protective fury that flooded through their incomplete connection like wildfire. He was coming. He was cutting through Wulfric's forces like a god of war, his wolf unleashed in all its terrible glory. But he wasn't going to make it in time. Wulfric smiled, sensing her weakness. Goodbye, vessel. He threw himself at the barrier, his wolf bursting forth in a blur of gray fur and snapping jaws. And Isolde made a choice. She dropped the shield. Wulfric's wolf slammed into her, and she fell beneath his weight, her back hitting the stone floor hard enough to drive the breath from her lungs. His teeth snapped inches from her throat, held back only by her hands braced against his massive shoulders. But she hadn't dropped the shield to surrender. She had dropped it to attack. The power that had been sustaining the barrier flowed down her arms, into her hands, and into Wulfric's body. It wasn't a weapon. It was something older, deeper. An ancient magic of motherhood and protection, of the bond between parent and child that transcended violence and blood. Wulfric's wolf howled in agony as the silver light wrapped around him, binding him, paralyzing him. She felt his shock through the contact. He had never expected this, never imagined that the vessel would be capable of fighting back. You want to know what real power looks like? Isolde gritted out, her voice strained with effort. It's not about purity or bloodlines. It's about love. And you've spent so long hating that you've forgotten what it feels like. The doors at the end of the corridor exploded inward. Eric burst through in wolf form, the largest wolf Isolde had ever seen, his dark fur matted with blood that wasn't his own. He shifted mid-stride, becoming a man again as he reached them, and his massive hands closed around Wulfric's paralyzed body, hauling the cult leader off of Isolde. You would murder children for purity? Eric snarled, holding Wulfric up by the throat. The ancient wolf's body was still bound by silver light, but his eyes blazed with undiminished hatred. You would threaten my mate, my child, my pack? Wulfric spat blood. The old bloodlines must remain supreme. Your mongrel heir will destroy everything our ancestors built. Kill me if you must, but others will rise. The circle will never... The circle dies with you. Isolde pushed herself up, her hand pressed protectively against her belly. She crossed to stand beside Eric, looking into the eyes of the wolf who had wanted to murder her baby. My child will be exactly what they're meant to be. Strong, loved, protected by parents who would burn down the world for them. She stepped closer, holding Wulfric's gaze, and you won't see any of it. Eric's claws extended, pressing into Wulfric's throat. Any last words that aren't propaganda? The ancient wolf's lips peeled back in a final snarl of defiance. History will prove me right. History won't remember you at all. Eric's claws tore through flesh and bone, and Wulfric Silvermane's body crumpled to the floor. The silver light binding him faded as life left his eyes, and Isolde watched until she was certain, absolutely certain, that he would never threaten her child again. Then her legs gave out. Eric caught her before she hit the ground, sweeping her into his arms with a sound that was half growl, half sob. Isolde. Gods, Isolde, I felt you through the bond. When Wulfric breached the walls, I thought I'd lost you both. I'm here. She wrapped her arms around his neck, burying her face against his throat, breathing in his scent of pine and wood smoke and blood. We're both here. It's over. But it wasn't quite over. Not yet. They found each other's eyes in the aftermath, surrounded by bodies and destruction. And Isolde saw the question burning in Eric's gold-tinged gaze. The battle was won. The threat was ended, and the bond between them hummed with desperate, aching incompleteness. Tonight, she whispered, after they've tended the wounded and honored the fallen, after our people know they're safe, tonight, I want to finish what we started. Eric's arms tightened around her. Are you sure? After everything you've been through? I've never been more sure of anything. She lifted her head to press a soft kiss to the corner of his jaw. You're my mate, my baby's father, in every way that matters. I want the whole world to know it. That night, the palace was quiet. The dead had been gathered, the wounded tended. The realm informed that the Purist Circle had been defeated, and their leader slain by the Alpha King himself. Tomorrow there would be ceremonies and celebrations, speeches and declarations. But tonight belonged to them, alone. Isolde stood by the fire in her chambers, watching Eric close and bar the door behind him. He moved toward her slowly, giving her every opportunity to change her mind, and when he finally stood before her, the firelight casting dancing shadows across his features, she saw no doubt in his eyes. Only love, only certainty, only home. How do you want to do this? His voice was rough, barely controlled. Together. She reached up to trace the line of his jaw, marveling at the way his eyes fluttered closed at her touch. I want to feel you through the bond. I want to know your heart the way you'll know mine. Eric's hands came up to frame her face, cradling her with unbearable gentleness. I've waited my whole life for you. Then don't wait any longer. He kissed her, soft at first, then deeper, his hands sliding into her hair as her fingers clutched at his shirt. Heat built between them, different from the warmth of attraction, different from simple desire. This was the mate bond straining toward completion, desperate to be sealed. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, Eric guided her toward the bed. She sat on the edge and he knelt before her, his eyes level with hers. I need you to know, he said, his voice barely above a whisper, that this isn't just claiming. This is a promise, a vow. When my teeth touch your skin, I'm binding myself to you forever. To protect you, to cherish you, to put your needs above my own for the rest of my life. Tears pricked at Isolde's eyes. And when I bite you? Then I'll belong to you completely, and I'll spend every day grateful for the privilege. She pulled him up onto the bed beside her, turning so her back was to his chest. His arm wrapped around her waist, his palm settling warm and protective over her belly where their child moved. His breath was hot against the junction of her neck and shoulder, and she tilted her head to give him access. I'm ready, she breathed. His teeth grazed her skin, and she shuddered. The anticipation was almost unbearable, every nerve ending alive and aching. When he finally bit down, his canines piercing the flesh where her neck met her shoulder, the world exploded into sensation. Pain lanced through her, sharp, immediate, undeniable. But almost instantly it transformed into something else. Warmth flooded her veins, cascading through her body like liquid gold. She felt the bond snap into place with an almost audible click, and suddenly she could feel him. Not just his body pressed against hers, his emotions, his thoughts, his overwhelming, all-consuming love for her, and for the child growing in her belly. It crashed over her like a wave, so intense it stole her breath, so profound it brought tears streaming down her cheeks. Eric released his bite, his tongue soothing the mark he'd left, and his voice was wrecked when he spoke. Isolde, gods, I can feel everything. My turn. She twisted in his arms, pushing him back against the pillows. His eyes were pure gold now, his wolf completely present, and when she leaned down to his throat, she felt his entire body tremble beneath her. Mine, she growled against his skin, and bit. His blood was copper on her tongue, his skin salt and musk and mate. She felt the moment her bite completed the bond, felt the connection between them roar open like a door that had been sealed for centuries. Through their new link, she experienced his side of the claiming, his shock, his joy, his bone-deep satisfaction at finally being hers. Yours. His voice echoed through the bond, no longer needing words. Always yours. Mate. Forever. She released her bite and pulled back to look at him. The mark on his throat was already beginning to heal, leaving behind a silver scar that would proclaim her claim to anyone who saw it. She touched it reverently and felt his satisfaction pulse through their connection. I love you, she said, the words coming easily now. I don't know when it happened. Maybe it was always inevitable. But I love you, Eric Valewood. He pulled her down against his chest, wrapping his arms around her and their child, and she felt his joy like sunshine in her chest. I love you, Isolde. Both of you. Forever. They lay tangled together as the fire burned low, their bond humming with contentment between them. Through the connection, Isolde could feel Eric's heartbeat as clearly as her own. She could sense his emotions shifting from fierce protectiveness to gentle wonder as he traced patterns on her belly, feeling their baby kick against his palm. Strongest wolf in a century, he murmured, his lips brushing her hair. That's what the healers said. I don't care if they're the strongest or the weakest. Isolde shifted closer, fitting herself against his side like she'd been made to rest there. I just want them to be happy. To grow up knowing they're loved, that they're wanted, that they'll never have to run through a forest bleeding and alone. They won't. Eric's arms tightened around her. I swear it. Our child will know nothing but love and safety and the absolute certainty that their parents would tear apart anyone who tried to hurt them. That's all I've ever wanted. The coronation took place a month later. Isolde stood before the gathered wolves of the realm, her mate bond with Eric blazing silver at her throat, her belly round with the child they both claimed. She wore a gown of midnight blue that matched Eric's formal attire, and atop her head rested the crown of the Luna, a delicate circlet of silver and moonstone that had belonged to every queen before her. People of the realm, Eric announced, his voice carrying across the great hall with easy authority. I present to you Isolde Valewood, your Luna, my mate, my queen, my equal in all things. The crowd erupted into cheers. Through their bond, Isolde felt Eric's pride and joy, and she sent back her own gratitude and love. It still amazed her sometimes, how far she had come from the bleeding, broken wolf who had collapsed at the border of his territory. How completely her life had transformed in a matter of weeks. She hadn't found what she expected when she fled into the forest that night. She had expected death, or at best, survival. She had never imagined that she would find a mate, a home, a family, a kingdom. But here she was, loved, protected, chosen. Her baby kicked and she smiled. The healers still said the child would be the strongest wolf born in a century. The prophecies still painted pictures of power and destiny and world-changing potential. But when Isolde looked toward the future, she didn't see prophesied power or ancient destiny. She saw a child, growing up surrounded by love. She saw herself, standing beside a mate who had chosen her when she had nothing to offer but her own battered heart. She saw a kingdom that had welcomed her despite her disgrace, that had fought for her and bled for her and celebrated when she was crowned. She saw home. Eric's hand found hers as the celebration swirled around them, his fingers intertwining with hers in a gesture that had become as natural as breathing. Through their bond, she felt his quiet question, "Are you happy?" She turned to look up at him, her mate, her king, her Eric, and smiled. "I'm home," she sent back, "and I'm never leaving." His answering smile could have lit the entire hall, and as the music began to play and their people began to dance, the Alpha King pulled his Luna into his arms and held her like she was the most precious thing in the realm. Because to him, she was. And finally, after months of grief and fear and loneliness, Isolde Stoneheart, now Isolde Valewood, believed she was worthy of being treasured.